of the Artivism initiative that Columbia University Teachers College, Gottesman Library, Adelphi, and Sing for Hope are co-sponsoring. If you are interested, you can go onto the Artivism website, which can be found just by Googling Artivism, ARTIVISM, and Adelphi, and it will bring you right to the main page. And you can see all of the events that are upcoming. If you're interested in serving as a student ambassador or would just like to know more about some of these organizations, please contact me, Stephanie Lake at adelphi.edu. And we have with us today Holly Solomon. She is our student ambassador. She's from Bethpage, New York. She's a senior majoring in studio art and minoring in graphic design. She's currently the president of Adelphi's Art Honor Society, Kappa Pi, and we are so delighted to introduce her and to hear a little bit more about some of her work. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Professor Lake, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Holly. As Professor Lake just said, I'm a studio art major here at Adelphi. I'm a senior, and I'm also the president of Adelphi's Art Honor Society, Kappa Pi. Some of the work that I've done in terms of activism, my activism is mostly using my art accounts platform to help share and boost biopic creators and also important and relevant information to the current events. Over the summer, one of my fellow e-board members on Kappa Pi came to me during the heights of the Black Lives Matter protests, and she suggested that we do an art raffle to raise money for the bail funds and for social justice organizations that were focused on helping Black lives to do our part. I thought it was a wonderful idea, so I brought it up to the other e-board members, and they thought it was a wonderful idea too. There's about 4 of us, so together we worked together to put together this art raffle, and we brought it up to the Adelphi Art Department professors, and they helped us spread the word and get the word out beyond Kappa Pi to get the whole department involved. So firstly, what we did is that we collected art donations. So like I auctioned off the painting, more e-board members auctioned off their own work, some professors auctioned off their work, and the collecting art portion was open to everyone outside of Adelphi as well. It could be anyone's work. And then once we accumulated the artwork, we posted about the raffle onto our Adelphi Kappa Pi Instagram. And from there, we would share on our own art accounts, on our own personal accounts, everywhere. We spread the word that this raffle was going on. And how the raffle worked is that for every $5 donation, you get an entry like towards winning a piece. And then every additional $5 would be another entry towards a piece. So like if you wanted piece number 9 and you submitted $20, that's 4 times your name is in for piece number 4, and also 4 times your money is going towards, the $20 is going towards the bail funds and organizations we were donating to. By the end of the raffle, we accumulated about $800, $790 to be more exact. And then using a split donation site, we split the donation money between about 70 bail funds and social justice organizations focused on helping Black lives. I was really thankful to do this. I was glad that my fellow e-board member brought this up to me, and that I was able to help do my part and spread awareness about Black Lives Matter. And now I would like to introduce our presenter today, Professor Marissa Gutiérrez-Vicario. Professor Marissa Gutiérrez-Vicario is the founder and executive director of the Art and Resistance Through Education, also known as ARTE, based out of New York City. As a committed human rights activist, artist, educator, and advocate for youth, she launched RETE in 2013 to help young people amplify their voices and organize for human rights change and in their communities and through the arts. Currently, Professor Marissa Gutiérrez-Vicario serves as an adjunct lecturer at the City College of New York in the Art Education Department. Welcome, Professor Gutiérrez-Vicario.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for the introduction and also for the questions you asked me earlier. I hope that some of this presentation will answer some of those, and if not, I'm happy to connect, but I'm grateful for the work that you're doing as an organizer, an art cultural organizer, if you will. I think that's more important. I was just telling Carolina, who is one of the organizers, and thank you for having me as well, like, it's so important to walk the walk and like to do the work and how, whatever that means and whatever that looks like with the people around you, right? So yeah, I'm so grateful to be here and thank you. And I know you've been in class, so I'm hoping this will be engaging for you. This is my plan. But yeah, I am gonna show a presentation because with ARTE, we are a visual arts organization, so it's important to see the art and see what I'm talking about. So we're gonna pull that up in a second. And this is our logo, like Holly mentioned, this is Art and Resistance Through Education, or ARTE. Yeah, and I started this several years ago. I'm originally from Southern California and moved to New York, and was really interested at this. All my life I was told that like, you can't really do art. I mean, art is kind of like, you know, it's for certain people, like you can't make a living off of it, all those kind of things that made me doubt myself. But for me, it was really important to create a nonprofit that engage at the intersection of art and human rights. So I'll talk a little bit about that in our journey, and then also some art at the intersection of human rights and social justice and all these kind of different, like I said, intersections we're looking at right now. So you'll see on the next slide, yeah, just, you know, again, ARTE, looking again at what it means to reimagine human rights and what does that even mean? So we'll talk a little bit about that today, right? Next slide, you'll see an image. I'm so curious for folks that are paying attention and along. Does anyone recognize, well, it kind of already says that, but has anyone ever seen this image before? Or, yeah. So for folks, so I'm seeing some nods. Maybe you've seen this image. It's actually at the United Nations. So it says that there, it's in New York City. And it's actually much, and Caroline and I actually saw it together when we did our tour of the UN and met with folks, UNESCO folks. But I love this image. It's not as big as it looks in real life. It's so much smaller, but I love it because it's such a simple image and it conveys so much. A gun tied in the knot. The name of the piece is Nonviolence, literally Nonviolence, by Carl Frederick Reuter's Ward. So again, the idea that art can often very simply convey these messages, you know, very in very effective ways and very meaningful ways that resonate with people. So it's something I often show with students, and we work, especially prior to the pandemic, of course, in person with young folks, and a lot of them, you know, living in New York City have never even seen this before, and it's in their own city. So that's something to keep in mind in thinking about access to the arts and why is that. So yeah, so as we move forward in the presentation, though, like I mentioned, like Holly mentioned, we work to engage young people to amplify their voices for human rights change through the visual arts. And, you know, through creation, through imagination, through connectivity in the different ways and the work that we do. So I'll show some examples of what that looks like prior to the pandemic and like what that meant in person. And I'll talk a little bit, if we have time, what that means now in a COVID world, you know, and a post-COVID world and what that means for the future. So first off, I want to start on the next slide talking a little bit about why use the arts, you know. So I'll talk a little bit more about Artivism too. If you've been to all 5 of these workshops, great. But if this is the first time too, you know, we'll talk a little bit about what Artivism means to us and how we use it. So, you know, as you can see here, the art is used as a platform to talk about human rights change. I often say to folks that to engage people in activism, there's many different things you can do. There's sports, there's cooking, there's all these other things. But for us, the mechanism is art. And the reason for that, though, is, you know, art is a way for an individual to call upon their right to create something, to express your own humanity, creativity, and connectivity. It's also a way of activating parts of the brain that you normally don't have the opportunity to explore. And it's also a tool. So on one side, we have this way to create opportunities for dialogue and discussion. And on the other hand, we have the way to connect with people's spirits. And we definitely saw that during the pandemic of what it meant to engage in art, look at art, whether it's watching Netflix or actually creating, and what that meant to amplify and uplift people's spirits. And on the other hand, to create entire paradigm shifts, whether that is the movement for Black lives, whether that is you know, calling for the liberation of folks incarcerated, it has the capacity to change the way that we live, you know? So the next slide, you'll see it's also a part of a process, right? So it's I'm going to show you some pieces of artwork that our students have done, and I'm proud of them, but it's also, for me, it's not just about creating a piece of artwork. The artwork is good, but it's done by folks who had never picked up a paintbrush before, some of them who don't identify as artists. I'm curious even here, if you, for folks that are paying attention, like who here, if you want to, like, I don't know, you can raise your hand, or you could do who here actually identifies as an artist. I'm curious. And you can do the thumbs up if you do. Awesome. Yeah, and not everyone does, and that's okay. My other question to y'all is, who likes art? I'm looking around, so hopefully you like art a little bit if you're here. But so the idea that, like, whether you're creating art or whether you like art, it's a part of our lives, and it's a way for human rights to be explored and those explorations to be connected to individuals' lives. With art, this is also a process that, like, we're constantly questioning and exploring and never settling on a right answer. So what I meant to also say too is, like, we create art, it's good, but at the end of the day, if students were just to create this beautiful piece of artwork, but it wasn't attached to why they thought a human right was important, then to me that doesn't say much. It's about, like, we're engaging in a process because we're hoping that through the process we're educating ourselves and other people. So the method may not always be direct, but it's open to interpretation by the artist and the audience, whatever that, if the audience is a group of community members, if it's a group of school people in school, it's open to interpretation. It's cultivated by the community itself. And then lastly, in which the artist constantly questions the practice of making it, creating art to raise questions, challenge assumptions. So where art is not this static thing, we're constantly changing it, making additions, we're getting more information and we're changing it. So I think that art allows this exploratory process to examine human rights in our lives and around the world. So on the next slide, for folks that aren't familiar with, this is a document. If you leave taking one thing away from this presentation, I really hope that it'll be this document. So for folks that don't know, this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we always talk about this document because it is a framework for basic human rights. It's not, I won't get into the particulars of the document itself because that's a longer conversation, but it is a document that was set out in 1948, the idea that everyone, no matter who they are, where they're from, what their identity is, that they have these rights just because they're human. So we actually worked with an organization called Thought Matter to redesign the UDHR. So we printed out copies. If anyone wants one, seriously, I will mail you one and you can have one you put on your wall. But it's the idea that, like, once you know your rights, you're able to defend the rights of others and yourself. And that's very, very critical in all the work that we do. On the next slide, you'll see how ARTE uses the visual arts, right? So as a part of our human rights education curriculum and as a part of our Artivism that I've been talking about. So one is to teach about the arts in a safe, personalized, and exploratory context. So education and discovery. The other is creation. So for students to express themselves, their lives, and the human rights violations they may feel passionate about, or also they may have experienced. I don't know any of you, and I don't know what you have experienced in your life and who you are, and that is in the same with some of our students when we don't know them at first, but it's a gift to be able to share their stories. And often we find that, yes, they have experienced really difficult human rights violations. We also work in jails, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And given the system and given the way that it is set up, there are young people being there are experiencing human rights violations. So we think about, how do we create this space through art for folks to tell their story if they want to, and the things that they're facing. And then if they haven't particularly experienced human rights violations, that doesn't mean that they can't stand up to it using the arts. And lastly, of course, and this leads into the presentation. So the idea that to advocate for human rights change in their communities and across the globe, and similar to what Holly mentioned in terms of the on-campus activism, that we can use art as this tool that is able to make change in the world, whoever you are and wherever you may be located. So yeah, next slide. I am going to go through a few different pieces, if you don't mind, to just talk a little bit about our work and what that means. So here you'll see, I'm going to go through a few pieces, but like these are some art murals that we've done in the past. This one is particularly special just because it was a collaboration between young people who were incarcerated and students on the outside. So we engaged with them with for a 6-week curriculum focusing on 6 different global women heroes. Some of you can recognize Malala, Bree Newsome, Michelle Obama, and the idea was that the incarcerated students created this mural and this mural blueprint. But the idea is that we didn't want it to be inside of the jail. We wanted it to be outside so other people could see their work and also advocate for their rights as well. So we brought in another group of students to learn about mass incarceration, to learn about these issues that some of them were affected by and others weren't. For a lot of students, they're like, I think human right, I think jails are like orange is the new black, right? Like, so they had, some of them had like gross misconceptions, not their fault, but it was just what they had seen on TV. So it was a way to break down these barriers literally with the human rights violations that these women activists focused on, but also the barriers that by living in the system of incarceration, we're constantly a part of and experience. So that's actually, if you ever go to New York City, that's on 116th and Frederick Douglass. I think Carolina has seen it before, but I'm really proud of that piece. On the next slide, you'll see example. This was more of a multi-generational project, but this was a project done in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, with a group of people who were really fighting actively against gentrification. So in that area was being, I'm not trying to say I'm generalizing because there's people who live there and work there and who are not, but it was becoming like taken over by hipsters. Like, you know what I mean? So this was like folks like actively trying to preserve their neighborhoods that they have lived for decades and decades, but also as a way of like, how do you use a mural to share the whole story of a community through decades? So I love this project because it was messy. Like, it was like a group of folks who like, it was hard to get people to agree on an idea. It took a lot of different like sketches. It took a lot of different discussions, but eventually they landed on something that was encapsulated kind of the idea of freedom and justice and all the rights that they're fighting for, bilingual on a bridge, on the, I think it's the Williamsburg Bridge. So this was really, really important to them. On the next, oh yeah.
Can I just ask something just really quick? Because we were just in my class talking about Justicia, the blindfolded Lady Justice. Is that what you guys were referencing there?
I think I thank you for that. That is a good connection, actually. They were referencing more just the concept of justice and what that looked like in general. But I mean, so I guess in some ways, yes, because that symbol represents justice. But I think in general, they were just kind of they were also looking at different rights on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and seeing which one they thought could best be shared in a word. So, but good. Actually, that's coming up next. Actually, that the blindfold and the equal sign. So we'll talk about that in a second, but thank you. And here you'll see quickly also one of the murals. These are just some older ones, you know, but one that was done in a community working with recent immigrants to the US. So for them, it was really important to talk about the rights that they experienced in their own community, but also like the rights, like just what it meant to be discriminated against as an immigrant, but also they talked about LGBTQ rights and like for some of the students who had experienced really, really painful interactions with their peers. So that was a way for them to stand up against that. And then lastly, you'll see here, prison is a feminist issue. So going back to kind of people's misconceptions of jail and prison, this was an art piece that we done. It was a temporary art piece. So some of our pieces are temporary and some of them are permanent. But at the end of the day, a wall anywhere is temporary. So we understand that. That's why I always say it's about the process of engagement and what they learn, not the final product necessarily. But this was one that was done in, you can't really see entirely, but inside of it, there are pictures of people in jail. Women, they went through the internet, they did research and Google searches on the perception of women in jail. And they took images, whether it was Hollywood or like actual women, and they put that inside, they wheat pasted it, so they glued it inside of this mural that was a part of an exhibition focusing on incarceration. So yeah, that's another piece of students learning more about incarceration and what that meant in their own community. So Thank you. I will, if that's okay, I want to stop here for a quick second before we go on to the next thing. Does anyone have any questions about any of the murals or work that we've done before we move forward to the next slide? Cool. Okay. And if you think of any, please feel free to chat. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the work that we're doing and what Artivism we've done in the past, right? So here you'll see, this series is about Artivism, right? This series is about literally intersection of art and activism, but also one definition we like to use a lot is from Artivism galleries. So looking at the combination of art and activism that uses creative expression to spread awareness for social justice issues. So if you're an artivist, you would challenge the social and cultural norms by bringing personal and oftentimes private issues to light that sparks a dialogue for conversation. These are some of the different ways through pen, paintbrush, graffiti, spoken word, theater, sculpture, and other art mediums, but there's other ones I'm sure that you all can think of. Artivists intervene upon public spaces to make a political statement. So this is one definition that we like to use. You may have others, and feel free to put it in the chat box if you think of others, but this is something we've been thinking a lot about artivists, and on our social media, we've been doing our best to highlight to spotlight and highlight artivists who, whether it's Frida Kahlo, someone who's really well-known, or someone who's less well-known, the idea of these artivists have always been challenging public spaces and trying to think of ways to bring attention to issues that people are or aren't talking about. So on the next slide, you'll see, so I would love if this could be an activity that folks could chime in if they want. So one thing we think a lot about, and you saw it also on our work, is the idea of like icons and imagery, right? And like I started off with that image of a gun and thinking about the gun being tied into a knot as an image that maybe hopefully will be in your memory. So here I have a list of different images and icons. Some of you recognize, some of you might not recognize. And I would love if for a second, and on the next slide we can give you instructions, then we'll come back to it. But if you could, I know some of you also might have a pen and paper, so this might also be a time to pull out your pen and paper. But I would love if you could take one of those images or icons and you can draw it and think about it. So you take one, draw it, and think about it together. And I would love if you could share in the chat box, even if you don't draw it, that's okay, but you can share maybe what that image on the screen, how it connects to a particular human right, or what human rights movement, or what human right do you associate with that particular image. So I love, we can take like a minute or so. Again, if you want to draw it, you can do that. And then if not, we can also just put in the chat what resonates with you and what does that image make you think of. As folks are thinking and drawing, one thing I would like to maybe connect in a way to model this is, you see that hand kind of dove image there. That is actually the unofficial logo for human rights that was developed by a Serbian artist a few years ago. So I connect that with human rights education movement in the US and across the world. So I'm also seeing in the chat box gun and flower, so thinking about the Vietnam War. I'm also seeing in the 1968 Olympics and today the fist, LGBTQIA+, pride. Yeah, and Paul, I'm seeing, Paul, that like BLM has taken the black fist as its logo, which historically is very powerful, definitely, and it's still powerful to this day. Anti-war, transgender rights movement, Black Lives Matter, scale, equality on our hands, definitely. I love that drawing here, Alejandro, of the solidarity you have there. Thank you. That's an awesome ribbon you got going on. Do you want to say a little bit about that? If you want to.
You're asking me?
Oh, sorry, yeah. You.
Well, I just think that solidarity is essential for understanding, universal human rights. I also want to comment, since I have the mic, on Artivism, and I think an important word that goes together with being an artivist or doing artivism is being intentional. And I don't know if that was part of the definition, but it just not, it doesn't happen accidentally. You know, you are intentional anytime you want to comment on any of these issues. And I feel like, you know, to actually, for something to actually be called artivism, it definitely needs to be intentional.
I love that, and I'm thinking maybe we should add that to their definition, because I think you're right. Art, it's intentional, and I think it also mirrors activists and to activists and organizers too. What people do is very intentional work, right? Like, I always laugh when people talk about Rosa Parks being like, while it's a beautiful story, like they kind of remove it from the idea that it was a coordinated action and she was an organizer. You know, because I think people like this idea of this, like, oh, it just happened, but it takes away from the work that people put in, right? Like, and like there's thought behind it. So I really appreciate that comment, because it's 100% true, and the work that we do. And I mean, yeah, sometimes things happen and accidents do happen, but like ultimately an artivist, it's not an accident. So it's so thank you for that. And sorry.
In my classes,
okay.
when we're talking about art, activism, and artivism, I found the best way to present it is in a Venn diagram where you have the two circles, what's art and what's artivism, and what their common properties are, right? It's just because it's so difficult to understand. Even if you are an artist and you are an artist, like at what point does it become just art or just artivism, and where do they have, what are those common properties?
Definitely. And I would even add, is I also teach art education, like, you know, sometimes we even add educator, and like, you know, how does that add to the Venn diagram, and who are the people? And all of this can be debated, of course, of who that is, but it's interesting to see those intersections of who's an artist educator, who's an artist activist, who's all three. Is very fascinating. So yeah, thank you for that. And there's more comments in the chat, which I really appreciate. So please take a look. And I think also, yeah, I think we will continue on. So we'll skip the next slide and then go to the next, because the next slide had instructions, but and yeah, and we'll also stop recording right now.